that Socrates is basically set up, well, Plato is set up, right? This is clearly Plato, not something we think Socrates might have argued for, right? And that is that we already know everything before we're born. Because the soul, and the soul is eternal, Plato says because the soul has no parts. And to make something, you have to put stuff together. You put the parts together, and then you have a new whatever. Right? To destroy something, you pull the parts apart, and it no longer works. Right? You know, so for something to be made or destroyed, it has to have parts. But they argue the soul has no parts because it's invisible. So therefore, it has no physical parts, and so therefore it's eternal, right? So before you're ensouled, right, in the fetus, which this is much later, there's Aquinas, he figured it happened at 3 months because that's when the feet started going, you know how they do. And that movement meant the soul is there now, right? Because the soul, for the Greeks, was associated with motion. Right? So the soul is already in the universe and is completely at one with all of the ideas. And the ideas are also abstract and invisible. So triangularity, for example, you know, we know what triangles are, any three-sided figure. But if I draw a triangle, that's a physical thing. That's not really triangularity. Triangularity is the abstract concept of three-sidedness, right? Which isn't any place. And yet it's why all triangles are triangles. It's because of triangularity. And that's true of all the ideas as far as Plato is concerned. Why redness? Things are red. Why things are beautiful? Because of the characteristic of beauty in the thing. Because of number or whatever, right? He was a Pythagorean. So for Plato, the knowledge that we seek and that we hope to eventually have is the knowledge of the ideas, and the ideas are all abstractions, not the physical experiences that we have. In fact, at birth, what happens to us is that there's a forgetting, which in Greek is amnesia, right? You know, so you have a forgetting, amnesis, you forget, right? And then as you have an experience, you recall things. So what's happening is, oh, I somehow know what that is, right? I had, you know, this experience. And so you gradually have a remembering, which in Greek is anamnesis, right? A-N-A is kind of like the same as the Latin R-E, right? So remembering, right? But anamnesis is remembering in Greek, right? So confusing, but. So the slave boy knew all this stuff, it's just he had no opportunity to recall it yet. So that's the Platonic theory, right? Now, how many of you think that that's absolutely nuts? That's not how it works, right? Although, by the way, there are some interesting questions, because are we discovering electricity or are we inventing electricity?
Well, electricity exists in nature separate from our actions, so we're not creating
Ben Franklin with the kite.
We're not creating it, we're not inventing it, we are discovering it, but we're inventing applications.
Okay, but so here's the, so it's there.
Yes, it pre-existed.
So we didn't invent it.
We did not invent it, but we invented applications for it.
The same thing with relativity. Does Einstein invent relativity? Or has he discovered?
Discovered more than anything.
You see the problem?
Yeah,
So this stuff is already there. So in a sense, Plato seems right that we somehow rediscover it.
I say this has got more to do with the fact that science is more or less a pursuit of everything you know is wrong.
Yeah. Gravity doesn't really exist, right? Everyone knows that?
I'm not seeing you.
Well, the reason it moved down towards the table was because the movement of the pencil approximated the movement that the table was making, and the two of them then came together. But if you're thinking that there's a force that drew the pencil down, that doesn't really exist. Einstein threw that out. It's not my fault.
Are you telling me that my physics professor just last semester lied to me?
No, they just show you how acceleration due to gravity is measurable. Not literally lying, they're just saying there's a way to measure it, because you're taking one thing and measuring it against another.
Yeah, well, that was part of the problem. This concept of gravity was a mysterious force that's not really there. So what pulls things in? There's nothing actually that does it. But in Einstein's theory, everything is moving through curved space, so everything is kind of on trajectories. And because of the speed of things, that's why it's really confusing driving down the Glen Highway if you're thinking this way, because you think, well, the Earth is moving at this many, how fast the Earth is moving in, the north, east direction, which I still go out on my deck and I watch for the falling stars, et cetera, because, there goes one, yeah, et cetera, right? But, if you're driving and you're thinking, okay, I'm moving and the Earth is moving, and of course the sun is moving, so the Earth is moving along with the sun, so you're trying to calculate all of this, you're going to crash, so don't do it that way. Assume the model that the Earth is still and you're driving on it. That is the easiest way to drive. But it's wrong, actually. Right? If you're driving in one direction, you're going faster than you are the other direction, because if the Earth is moving that way, it slows you down when you're going this. Yeah, you get the idea.
Well, because it's all about motion in relationship to one another. Because if I
relativity.
am moving at a certain speed, but the ground is also moving at a certain speed, then my movement to that ground is
Just thought I'd
nothing.
throw this out there to But remember, though, in another theory, which is perfectly fine, nothing moves at all. We're just going through time with our conscious experience, right? So it's all
That makes
actually.
even less sense.
It's the frozen
It's
river.
not getting better.
Everything is fixed from the very beginning of time to the very end.
No.
Evolution doesn't really happen at all, of course, because the Tyrannosaurus is still exactly where it was in its time and space, even as we're here, right? Because all time exists at once. Sorry about that, but that's true too.
I get the idea, but how hard do you have to work to prove that?
We can't prove it. It's science.
Well, I mean, you could look at the stars.
Science is theories. Theories are neither true nor false. They're interpretations. That's not my fault either.
That's
Will not
Now,
understand
if you hear a
emotion
scientist saying, "I've
relationships.
proven such and such," he's not a very good scientist. Scientists.
Failure to understand relational movement is why you get lymph rest malfunctions on pistols.
Okay.
True fact.
That's also, by the way, why you can't teach science in Kansas, almost.
In Kansas, because it's too
Because
flat.
I don't want you teaching my children something unless you know it's true. Well, that cuts out all of science. It's actually,
again, pursuit of that.
Kansas
Wow,
is
that's not how
flatter than a
science
pancake,
works.
by the way. They did the research.
okay. So, I think we're all in agreement, though, that Plato's theory of knowledge is absolutely bananas, and we don't have to believe that. but it's certainly interesting because it was the first one as far as we know. And then along comes his student Aristotle, Aristotelos, best purpose, best design, right? And he comes up with a better design on how to imagine how knowledge works, and it's categorical thinking, right? And we did the A-E-I-O statements, I think, last time, right? But notice that all of those are based on you're relating two categories, the subject and the predicate, to one another. So everything is categorical. Did I draw the circles so that you have like, hey, I got a black one. So if I have, say, mares, did I do mares? So all mares are horses. And all horses are grazing animals, right? And all grazing animals are animals. And all animals are living things. And all living things, imagine things, etc., right? So, and we can also have other things like, well, so these are cows. So they're obviously not in horses, but they are grazing animals, so actually I should have put them over here, right? So what am I doing? Category, right? Category A. Which do you prefer, Stanford? What's more impressive? Smaller. Oh. So this is part of his organon, which is a tool, and so this is part of Aristotle's logic. Right? So it's also parts of speech. So when we're talking about categories, he's talking about things like nouns. But even predicates are actually sets. Right? So you might not think, I'm walking across the front of the room. That sounds like it's the noun I, and I'm doing an action. So you don't think there's two sets of things. But in this sense, if you think of me as being, at the moment, a member of the set of things that are walking across the front of the room. So it is a set of things. See? It's just weird, but you get the idea. So it's categorical thinking. So all knowledge is essentially an arrangement of the nouns and their relationships to other nouns. Right? So categories, right? So it's categorical, right? And so if I say something that's true or false, it's like, well, all mares are horses, that's true. If I say all cows are horses, that's false. So the reason statements are true or false is because you compare them to what we know to be the categories that are the real things that are true. Right? And how do we learn this stuff? Well, we send people out and count everything. So if you look at Aristotle's how do you spell Aristotle? Thank you. Pick one of his works, any of them. Athens Constitution, The Gate of Animals. So here we have Aristotle describing animals based on how they walk. Imagine how boring that must have been. You go from Socrates arguing about justice to Aristotle trying to figure out, this horse goes like this. That's a real switch, a move, right? Right? So, fish, footless, so he's detailing all of these characteristics. me show you. So the Athenian constitution, categories on dreams, on the gait of animals, on generation and corruption, birth and death, on the heavens, the history of animals, on interpretation, longevity and shortness of life, on memory and reminiscence, metaphysics, meteorology, on the motion of animals, different than in walking, Nicomachean ethics, how ethics work, on the parts of animals, physics, poetics, politics, posterior analytics, prior analytics. Those are two other parts of the organon, so it's logic, on prophesy. And by the way, when you look at these, you can see that he's talking about how sentences work. Because knowledge is the knowledge of true sentences, and sentences are grammatical arrangements. So that's what knowledge. So when you know stuff, you know the statements that are true. And by the way, you should also know which statements are false. Excuse me. It does puzzle me when people say that Trump lied. We talk about Trump lying before?
No.
No? There was one article that Ann Coulter, right? She's hilarious. I think she's fantastic. But this one time she was complaining that President Trump had lied when he talked about Afghanistan and Iraq. He said, that the war hasn't done anything for the United States, right? And she said, that's a lie, etc. Well, the thing is, that's actually a theory, and theories are neither true nor false, and she should know that. She's a philosophy professor. And so saying that he's lying when actually what he's saying is theoretical, it's neither true nor false, that's not what a lie is. A lie is when you know a statement is true, and then you deliberately say that it's false, right? Well, but the kinds of statements that could be true or false are A-E-I-O statements, and not things like theories or scientific theories and things like that. So those are his opinions about things that he's saying. So you can't say that his opinions are a lie. Really, what she should have said is his opinion, I disagree with his opinion. I don't think it's a very good opinion, right? But you shouldn't call it a lie.
His opinion doesn't match up with what we know to be true.
Well, you definitely say opinion based on falsehoods or something like that.
Well, you get the idea. If we're calling someone a liar, we're trying to insult them or belittle them in public. And you might want to do that, for President Trump. I understand that 100% as well. It's kind of interesting. I went to the bookstore the other day. It wasn't my fault. I said to myself, do not buy that book. Do not buy that book. And then my daughter said, I have to go to the bookstore and buy something. Shoot. So I took her there, and she went and looked for her book. She couldn't find it, by the way. As soon as I walked in the door, there it was, Fear. But fortunately, right next to it was this. So I bought this book, and that way I could put this book on top of the other one so no one could see that I was buying the other one.
So you were having fear.
I was afraid of buying Fear, yes.
He was having a moral discussion with himself. That's interesting.
By the way,
I
the
find
reason
it
why that
curious
fell
that
apart for you is you used incorrect NeuroLinguistic Programming, because the brain does not recognize or process negatives in the same way. So you should have said avoid buying it, or buy something else, or
I
buy
was
nothing.
going to go to the
But
Barnes
when
and
you say
Noble
do
store,
not
but they
buy
made
it,
me.
your brain
And
doesn't
once I
hear
walked
the
in,
not.
My steely discipline ran away.
But you were still self-conscious about it because you hid it.
Yes, well, it's like the guy that's walking by the dead body. He says, I'm not going to look at that. And as soon as he got next to it, he looked at it. And he was so angry at himself. Yes, because he had promised himself he was not going to do it. And then he himself, and so, by the way, Plato uses this to point out that there's got to be at least three parts of us. The kind of the id side that wants to do things, the rational side that says, I'm going to do X and Y, but not Z, right? And then there's the thumus.
What actually happens.
The themis, however you pronounce it. Psychology majors here, the thymus.
Or ego.
Well, and so I end up having a third part of me, which I think for Plato, it's the guy who's riding. He's got the two horses. He's, so, but
I was going to say, every case is someone saying, don't look down.
don't think of a pink elephant.
I told you, it's because you're not using correct neurolinguistic programming.
They do that on road signs all the time, like don't drink and drive.
Don't, tell my daughter, okay, so driving down at night to Soldotna, so when you see cars coming the other way at night and the lights, it draws you to the left.
Mm-hmm.
Look down to the right so that you're not drawn over there. And, hopefully, she hasn't hit anything yet except for a porcupine.
Come to think of it, you just brought something up, the whole don't drink and drive thing. I don't think I've heard anybody officially use that in like a decade.
But there's road signs all over the place.
No, road signs maybe, but I don't think...
My problem is when I'm driving along and it says keep right, if you follow that sign, you end up in the ditch.
Were you drinking and driving?
The sign was, in the gutter, and so if you stay to the right of the sign, you're off into... No, I don't really do that. If you just follow signs literally, though. Maybe it's time for a break. Should we take a break?
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a break. Is that right? We've been here, we started at 6:30, so we're at the roughly halfway point.